Okay. Hi, everybody. Today is about slide design. And we are going to be talking about how much information should go on a slide. We're going to talk about um, the titles. We're going to be talking about the visuals on the slides. As a neuroscientist also, and I did a lot of work in cognitive neuroscience whenever I was an undergrad, like the arrows, the positions, the color, the font, like all of that is going to come into play today. And then we're going to spend a little bit talking about delivery, if that is something that you have some interest in. And so to get started, no, yes, here we go. Okay. All right, we're going to be talking about how you select the brain, what data do you put on your slide? Does it make sense in the order that you put it in? And how does your brain work with all of this? Okay, so to get started, I have for us an experiment. And so how do you know how much information? A lot of times you might attend a talk and they might say something like, I know there's too much information on here, but, right? And then automatically, how many of you just tune out? How many of you just like, okay, never mind. They just told me not to pay attention, right? That's basically what it is. And a lot of what we talked about last time is that you want to bring your audience along. You want to help them to see your story from start to finish. And when you're presenting data, it shows a lot of care for them whenever you're selecting the data that they can actually like take in and understand. And so a lot of times people call it like peeling the onion, but I'm like, a lot of people don't like onions. And so I picked an orange. It's nice and bright. And you know, you might have the whole orange and you're just going to give them a slice of information. And if they want more, they can ask for it, but you're going to give one at a time because you cannot stuff the whole orange in your mouth, right? Maybe that's like a party game, but we're not going to do that at a scientific talk. Okay. And like maybe I attend the most boring parties, but okay. So we're going to do an experiment, and this is how much text or types of information do you add to a slide. Okay, so the way this works is on the next slide, I'm going to put up some slide with some amount of objects on it. When you have identified how many objects are on the slide, you give me a reaction of some sort, and I'm going to be timing you. Hold on, let me put up my timer. Clock, timer. Okay, stopwatch. And we'll see if y'all have the reaction speed of most of the rest of America. Okay. All right. Got it? I'm going to put up a slide, and when you know how many objects there are exactly, give me a reaction. Or I'll put up the chat too. You can also say done if you don't know where your reaction button is. Because mine updated and I'm not sure my reaction button. Okay, ready? Everyone ready? Let's test this out. Show me you're ready. Okay, excellent. All right, here we go. And, oh, I have to wait for all the hands to go down. That would be unfair. I'm gonna wait for those two to disappear and then don't put it up again. Okay, hold on. Okay, ready. And go. Okay, I'm gonna call that average. Okay, about 9 seconds. I know some people were like, yes, there are 11 items. Yes. Cindy was like fast to the draw. I will say, we'll say, you know, if the range is between like 4 seconds and 9 seconds, right? Like we've got something like around 6 or 7. Okay, ready? We're gonna do this 3 times because I said I'm a scientist. Ready? Next time. Here's the next slide. Let me reset this and go. Okay. Yes, there are 8 items. So that one was around 2 seconds faster. 2 seconds faster. Ready? One more time. And go. Yes. Okay, that was 3 seconds. I would like you all to know that you're normal. It's about 2.5 seconds. Excellent. Okay, so the point of all of this is that it takes about that much time for you to understand, like just to see something. Anything more than 5 things that you have to interpret, it takes twice the amount of cognitive load, and your brain will choose not to, right? If you're looking at a slide that you cannot quickly interpret, subconsciously or maybe consciously, you're like, I'm opting out. I'll catch you on the next one, right? How many of you do that? You don't have to raise your hand. I do that, right? And so this number is between 5 and 7. And this is sort of a universal thing. That's why phone numbers, aside from zip codes, are 7 digits, because we can remember 7 easily. We can identify, like we can keep together 7 easily. And a lot of marketing principles for read your subject titles that you get from, your spam emails from the clothing stores and the products that you get. There were 7 words or less. There's a reason for that. And so when you're looking at what is on your slide, you might think like, oh, I have 7 graphs. That's fine. But okay, I'm going to show you some data. And here's 2 things I'm going to ask you to do. Don't interpret the data. This is not a RIPS. So don't interpret the data. I'm showing it to make a point. And 2, these are my data from my postdoc, so don't judge me. Okay. Alrighty, here we go. So I was doing a QP, nope, was this a qPCR? This is an ELISA for different cytokines, right? So now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 graphs. And then, you're asking, why do you have TNF twice? Well, I just was trying to make a point here. So what you're really looking at though, okay, you're looking at genotype. What's my x-axis? You're looking at y-axis. You're trying to interpret what the difference is between them. So you're trying to look at like changes. And then you're trying to say, what's the change between like this one and this one, right? You're trying to then look between graphs. Then you're like, why the heck did she have triangles on here and then circles here and then squares here? And then some of them are shaded differently. So you're looking at shading, you're looking at shape. That's 6. Okay. And then I haven't even started talking about the data yet. And so the point that I'm making here is that, okay, you're trying to see, actually, when you look at a graph, there's a lot involved. And I didn't even include color in this. And so when you're looking at any sort of data, you have to ask yourself, what is my message, right? And we talked last time about identifying. Remember, we talked about this, this template here, right? What is it that you are, let me make this bigger so that people who are on the video can see this, right? What is your main idea? What is it? Why do people care? And what are people going to do with the information? It's the same for every slide. What is my message for this slide? Why do people care? And what's my next decision from it? And so something that might be more helpful, a more concise slide, and then here's a title, right? Changes in plasma cytokine levels, would be to say, these were the 2 cytokines that changed. People show everything to show that you're rigorous and that you're thoughtful and that you are a good scientist. And that's appropriate for a lab meeting. Have that. Your PI needs to see it, your colleagues to see it so they can give you really critical feedback on like your outliers, your range, or do you have an appropriate power analysis, all of that. Great. But if you're doing like a departmental RIPS, consider something like this, which is, these are the biggest changes we're looking at. Yes, this works because I did it 4 times, right? We have an appropriate N, I ran the power analysis. We didn't have a statistical difference in these genes. If you want to see the data, I'm happy to show them to you afterwards. But let me tell you a little bit more about TNF. That's what our lab looked at, TNF, right? So that's one way to do that. Here's another way. And so when you're looking at Dr. Chow, he's explaining drop-seq. And so he takes this image from his cell paper. But what I want to show you is how he came up with this image from his figure. And so in his paper, you know how papers now have a graphical abstract? Okay, so this was the graphical abstract. So for drop-seq single cell analysis, this is an example of what you have to know to get started, right? So you have these beads that have these tiny barcodes on them, and he's trying to show that he has different barcodes. And then you're going to look at all these different kinds of cells that you could have. And he's trying to illustrate all the different cells with all the different shapes. And then the point is that you try to get one cell in with one of the beads. So this is the goal. This is good. So you know what you're getting at. But your brain, I don't know about your brain, my brain was like, oh, is that supposed to be like a red blood cell? And is that one a macrophage? And oh, that one's like, what is that? Is that like, what kind of cell is that? You know? And so automatically you're already trying to think about these things. And the thing that you're missing out is the point of the slide. So he then redesigned this slide to look like this. So you've got your beads, doesn't matter that they're coded with all these different oligos. He can say that, and then he can demonstrate that in another way. All the cells are now uniform in shape, and he demonstrates that they're different by changing the color. And then once again, he shows that this is what he's going for. One bead right here with one cell. He enlarges it and says, this is what we're looking for. This is what we're going to do our analysis on. These other ones, it's going to happen. You're going to get your variety. This is the goal. And so these are the simple things you can do. Be very intentional with how you're thinking about shape and color. A lot of people will change the color on your slide to show something, and then at the same time change the shape. You may not need both, right? And so be thinking about what you're trying to emphasize and the use of color and shape. So I have two more examples for you, and then we're going to go into yours, right? So this was blown up. Oh, so here's, now we had talked about the first part of the figure, and here's what the rest of it looks like. Now, I'm not here to teach you about drop-seq. You can watch his video and read his paper. But what I wanted to illustrate with this is that it's very clear in the sense that you can see it goes in the Western style from left to right, top to bottom, right? So we're reading from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then back down here, 6, 7, 8, 9. This makes a lot of sense. Some people tend to do like the trail that goes like this, like it's snaking back and forth, like you're like doing switchbacks on a mountain or something. But it tends to work better if you just do the lines. It just helps your brain a little bit more, because now you're like going backwards. And while you can follow along, because there might be arrows, you're still thinking like, why am I going backwards? Why am I reading to the left? This isn't making sense, right? Just things that you're adding cognitive load. And so the other thing, if I were to redesign this, is I might put all of the headings on the top, just so that if you're skimming, because here I'm like, it's like a word find. You're like, where's the next? Where's the next? Again, it's just extra work, that extra 3 seconds it takes. And the thing is, like, I've done this workshop and done polls like, how many people are willing to read it? How many people like to listen to it? And the thing is, scientists, I love y'all so much because you're willing to do the work, because you're like, they put in the work. I want to understand this. I'm going to work hard. But at the end of the day, let's be like kind to each other's brains. And so one thing you could do is you could take these headings and put them all so that they're easy to skim, right? This is also a really good method whenever you're doing your resumes. I'm going to pop out for a minute and apply this to a different application. But whenever you're doing your resumes and things, also they put eye tracking machines on people who read resumes, and they're skimming the front of your bullet points and then popping to the end of your bullet points. And so really long sentences, they're not getting read, right? So just thinking about like skimming. So here, if people are going to skim the process, make it really easy for them, put it all in one line. Questions? You can always throw them in the chat, or you can unmute, feel free. Okay, here's another example, Dr. DeBose-Boyd. So in Dr. DeBose-Boyd's example, do I have, is this the one where, hold on. Where is the timing of this? 5:57. Well, I think, does it change? Hold on.
So LDL receptors that are on the surface of cells bind to LDL by interacting with this apolipoprotein B particle that surrounds the lipoprotein shell. Once the LDL particle binds to LDL receptor, the entire complex is internalized into coated pits, and these coated pits are then targeted to lysosomes, where the LDL particle is degraded, and the cholesterol, free cholesterol, is now liberated and provided to the cell for various uses.
Okay. He has a very good video if y'all want to watch it. And so what Dr. DeBosboy does really well is, as he's talking about this, he's very intentional about his use of color, right? He could have made the lysosome a different color, but then your brain is like, why is it orange? Is it important? Well, what is the important thing here? It's the cholesterol and the processing of the cholesterol in the cell. And so I understand this takes a little bit of work to redesign your slides. If you look at his paper, you're going to see that it's actually, I don't remember. I think it's all black and white. I mean, it was a PNAS paper from Brown and Goldstein. So, but this is one way that you can do that. Just think very about what is the thing you're trying to demonstrate and how do you use color just to help you with that. Okay, here's another example. So Dr. Wayne, Elizabeth Wayne uses shape. So here she's just trying to make a point about the selectin and the trail. And of course, these cells, these proteins don't look like this, right? And so one thing that she chose not to do was to use color here. And so that's something that you can decide, like use shape or color. If you're changing shape and color, have a very good reason for it. And remember that changing shape and color on two things is actually four things your brain is trying to process, because you have like black and white arrows and black and white like selectin, and then you're like, what is the difference between them? Shaded, not shaded. Remember, so everything you do is going to add a different factor, and then you haven't even talked about the data yet. Okay, here's another example. And so Dylan does, what Dylan did is he had a example of all the different kinds of microbes, and he had microbes that were, again, to demonstrate all your whole microbial environment. There were different sizes and shapes and colors, and some of them had flagella and some didn't. And in the end, he kind of showed, okay, well, this demonstrates the yellow ovals represent all the different kinds of bacteria that are out there. And then something that is done really well, I would say, is that these are kind of subheadings. And instead of writing the entire sentence out about like, this is the importance of nutrients and competition and spaces, but like you can listen to the lecture too. Dylan does it really well. But here, these are just reminders for your talking points, because at the end of the day, they're coming to hear you tell your story about it. Right? So they're either going to read the slide or listen to you. And so consider having just bullet points that are simple, a little bit of color to get you going, and then simplifying anything that's not necessary. All right, so I'm going to pivot now to slide titles. I'm gonna check our. Okay, still waiting on slides. Just letting you know, we're going to start going to your slides here in the next few minutes. Okay. Okay, slide titles. We talked about the importance of having 5 to 7 words. Putting the punchline first and making sure that less is more. And so when you're doing a slide title, it has to convey your message. So again, if we go here to the, oh good, people are putting stuff up. So here, right, like what is your main idea? What is it that you're sharing? Make sure it's about the message, not just the observation, right? And so here's an example. How effective is this slide title? Anybody? Anybody know what the most important part is? Feel free to put it in the chat. Right? Exactly. It's hard to tell. Right? So I don't even remember, and I listened to the talk. And so how are we thinking 20 to 30 different categories of objectives? Thank you, Sindhu. Yeah. It's a very overwhelming slide. And, it's going to be an important, like when you're teaching with it, you'll have to go through it one-on-one, one by one, but just remember that you have to be able to look at it and know what it is that you're presenting. So, oops, I had a slide about slide, hold on. Where was it? Hold on. What's it? Okay. So here, for example, in Dr. DeBosboy's slides, if you go through, you'll see that they're all pretty concise. And then, so this is synthesis of cholesterol in various tissues. And something that he could have done is also talk about, they wanted, this one is to show like the distribution of it. But the other thing that you could look at is if you're trying to make a point like, oh, we're trying to look at this particular tissue, you can just go ahead and highlight that too. So let's see here. There's one. Okay. This one is, I think, a really good demonstration of how to deliver your core message, which is he has what the effect is. Statins lower plasma LDL cholesterol and reduce incidence of heart attacks. So you can see right away what the punchline is, right? It's not that, it's not the measurement of coronary events related to cholesterol, because that for you is a description of your figure, right? Like that's like, this is what I did, but this is why it matters. So sometimes think about wording your title as the why instead of the what. And again, it depends on your goal, like what type of presentation are you giving? Who is the audience? You have to always consider that. But oftentimes the so what of the title, making your title the so what is more effective. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. All right. I am going to pause the recording and start looking at the slides. All right. We're going to go to the second part now about traits of good public speakers. So this is a study done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we were going through and talking about the different qualities. And so as we were talking about the authenticity part is, how are you presenting in a way that is comfortable to you and is honoring everything that is important to you and your values when you do speak, right? If I remember once there was a postdoc that came in and talked to me about a job interview that she was going on. And she was like, well, I read something that you need to wear crazy socks so they know you have personality. And I was like, well, how does that make you feel? And they were like, I don't like crazy socks. And I was like, well, don't wear crazy socks, right? And so that's an idea of like the authenticity. You want to, there's going to be a lot of advice out there, but what if it applies to you? What's one way that you're willing to and comfortable with portraying yourself when you're in an audience, in front of an audience, or on the job hunt, right? So there's going to be lots of ways to do that. Your ability to read the room. And this is really important in two ways, right? Especially if you've done some teaching, you've got a little bit more practice in this, seeing what your audience is interested in, what they're nodding along with, or maybe when they have confused looks. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that if you are giving a presentation and someone does make a face, it doesn't mean that you're doing a terrible job. It just means like maybe they got a text from somebody or something like that. Remember that you're responsible for the experience of everybody in the room. And so there's a time to invite interruptions, and if someone has a question that is helping you to make your point or will help clarify it, go ahead and address it. But if somebody asks a question that you think is going to disrupt your flow or where you are mentally, just say, thank you for the question. Can we get at that at the end? Because you're also responsible for bringing the whole audience along with you. And so remember to preserve that as you're giving your presentation. And then being able to adapt. And so that's something that's going to be, as you read a room, you'll get more comfortable with that. And it comes with practice. And so each time you work on any sort of public speaking, I don't look at this list and say, how can I do all of these things a little bit better next time? I say, I think I'm pretty good with the, quality 3 and quality 6. This next time, I'm going to work a little bit more on reading the room, and I'm going to do this by, setting a specific goal. This is not for you to do all the time, every single time. So it's just something to keep in mind. In general, there's this fun study where they looked at TEDx speakers and rated them in terms of how engaging their talks were, irregardless of the content. And it turns out that these were 3 of the things that people said were engaging about speakers. talking about research, which is vocal variety. And that means having some pauses in between when they're talking, having some differences in inflection, and having a difference in pace and speed is important. So knowing when to slow down, not talking much too quickly. And then in terms of body language, the number one thing that people liked is whenever you had open hands. You don't, have to talk like like you're about to be in front of 1,000-person crowd. But what's important is that you don't have your hands in your pockets, or you don't have your hands behind you. I know you can't see because we're all sitting down. But at some point, the reason for this open body language is because just primitively, it's like trust. You can see where my hands are, right? Just, that's an example of that. So one of the best things you can do for pacing is to practice. This is the number one thing that people don't do. They don't practice. And so one of the things you can also pay attention to, if you're giving practice talks, you can have people record when you use filler words. They do this in Toastmasters. If there's a Toastmasters at Mount Sinai, I would highly recommend going. Is there, Anna? There is. Okay. So at Toastmasters, when it's your turn to present, someone will say like, you this, or at WashU, whenever I went, they would say, this is many filler words you use, and these were the most common. And it helps you just to be intentional about, instead of a filler word, pause and consider how many slides you have. One of the biggest mistakes, if you are short on time and you have many slides left, the instinct is that you're going to go through all the slides super fast, right? Like, I don't know how many of you've done that. I've done that. I have the urge to do that when you're like, okay, I have all these data in a minute, I'm going to tell all of it to you. The better thing to do is to just take the 10 seconds to either look at what's coming up and decide what is the one slide or 3 slides, depending on how much time you have left. If someone's just flashed up like 2 more minutes, 1 slide, you do 1 slide. Pick the 1 slide that's going to help emphasize your core message the best, or emphasize your so what the best. Or now you're moving to the now what. I've given you all the data. Let me tell you what I'm going to do with it. So just remember again, this core outline. What is it? So what? Now what? And come back to that. And that's going to be a better experience for you. It'll be a better experience for the audience. And then, as we talked about, not having too much data on one side is really important. And then finally, have you reiterated your message, right? So now I want to do another experiment, if you're willing to. This involves some speaking. So if y'all are willing to just unmute and say if you can, right? So I'm going to type in a sentence here, or actually maybe I can do it in the whiteboard. Okay, here's our whiteboard. Oh, hola, ciao. Okay. I think that's fine. Okay, so here's my, okay. I am a botanist, and I am here today to talk about composting. The importance of soil, right, in growing plants, but we'll just say composting. So to demonstrate this, I want you all, sorry, okay. Okay, if you all can and are willing to, unmute and say this sentence with me. Okay, wait, can you see that? Is it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. On 3. 1, 2, 3. I am a botanist,
and
I'm here today to talk
about
composting. Great. So now I want to ask you a question, and then you respond to me. Okay. Are you an engineer? Now say the sentence again. I am a
I'm a
I'm a
botanist,
botanist, and
and
I'm
I'm
here today to
talk about
about
composting.
composting.
Are you here today to talk about genetic engineering?
I'm a botanist, and I'm here today to talk about composting.
Composting.
So this is an exercise that they do in TEDx when it's delivery, like the delivery workshop. The reason why this is important is whenever I asked you if you were an engineer, what did you do?
Put the emphasis on botanist.
Yeah, the emphasis on botanist. Not only vocally, I'm a botanist. What else did you do besides the verbal emphasis?
Maybe a stop in the
Yes, there's a stop. You change the pace. What did I say when I was like, I'm sorry, you're here to talk about like CRISPR? Same thing. You're like, no, I'm here to talk about composting, right? Vocal variety changed with an inflection and the pace changed with a pause. And so you can use these very simply to gather the audience's attention when you're reading something. So if we were to go back to, let's see here. I'm going to go back to, back to this one, because this was a pretty decently, no. This title. As you're reading it, you're going to say, in this slide, we're going to be talking about how statins lower plasma LDL cholesterol, right? Or you can be talking, because you've been hearing about statins the whole time, right? So this is how they lower them. And it also reduces the incidence of heart attacks. Man, isn't that great? You don't have to say that, right? But by doing that pausing and the inflection, you can demonstrate that. Okay, you want to do one more exercise? This one will work if so in a classroom, it's really fun because you get to see everybody, but what we'll do is you can see the people who have video on. Okay, so now everybody, what you're how you're normally sitting in front of, let's just, you don't have to have your video on, it's all good, but I want you to kind of just like stretch. We've been sitting here for an hour, right? So go ahead and just like stretch your arms out. Sindhu, if you want to turn off your camera and do this, it's all good. But I also welcome you to just do it right here, right? Okay, so we're gonna stretch. Okay, now sit in your chair, or if you're standing because your video, I'll go ahead and stand. And this is your 5. This is your just normal everyday. I'm just sitting here. I'm just standing. Now everybody melt to your like. I'm so exhausted. I'm like melt to your number 1. Okay, just kind of. You're down, right? Okay. You're just like, why am I here? Okay. Now give me your 10. Give me your like, you're like, all right, let's go. I'm ready for this, right? Like your best, hands on the hip, like you're about to scare a bear. You're big, right? This is your 10. Okay. So now everybody give me your 7. Okay. And typically the difference between your normal, give me your normal again, and your 7. Just stand a little taller. Maybe your shoulders go back. Your spine is a little bit straighter. In any sort of presentation, aim for the 7. This is the other thing that they tell you in TEDx speaker training. Aim for the 7. And that just gives your lungs a little bit more room. It makes you feel more confident, look more confident. And so you don't have to be like at a 10, like, I'm here to talk to you about statins, right? Like please don't do that. But aim for the 7. And then the other thing you can do is if you're wanting to make an emphasis and you feel comfortable, you can use the podium space. You can go from the center of the podium, walk around to make a particular emphasis on a slide. You can point to it, then walk back to the podium. And what they say in the TEDx training is like they have that red dot, right? That you're familiar with this red dot. It's very small, actually, the rug is small. So they say if you're wanting to emphasize, they have the acting coach come in and they're just like, just shift. You can shift. But luckily you'll have a podium and slides and things. So you can use the podium as a prop. So let's see here. What do we got? Oh yes. Okay, so for this slide, the reason why I bring this up is when you're talking about your story arc, right? We talked about how you're giving your what is this at the beginning as you're giving the research in your context. Then you had the so what, why does this matter? What is all the data that demonstrate it? And at the end, what is your vision? What's the closure? What is the now what? A lot of time, we spend most of our time in this middle of the arc, and we don't leave appropriate time to end it, to close it up. And then a lot of times too, the inflection for people who give introductions is very like, okay, let's just get through this and I'll get to the data. And you can hear that in the way that they, the tone of the excitement or the labor of having to do the introduction. But remember that this image of, let me see here. This is really important, right? It is the beginning and the end, and it's what will bear the weight of your entire arc. When you can have a strong beginning that ends with something that connects the whole story together. So as you're thinking about it, again, use the what, so what, now what, and be very intentional about saying to the audience, so now that we've looked at these data, remember that, and then connect it to your beginning. That's going to be really important in terms of your delivery. It's always satisfying whenever there is that punchline that's talked about at the beginning, at the end. I have a friend who actually was on jury duty this week, and she said one of the most satisfying things was whenever the person presenting the case tied it up at the end with some of the phrases they used at the beginning when they were presenting the case. They were like, and remember, this is about, A, B, and C. And at the very, very end, they remember, so hopefully this evidence has shown to you that A, B, and C is what you were looking for. And you are going to be doing the same thing because you're presenting your case. Your case just happens to be something about research. And then finally, I did have here, how do you adapt and read to a room? If this is accessible to you, having eye contact is helpful. So appreciative of people who can show their video. Remember to greet the audience when you get there, even before you get started. I know there's going to be a rush to be like, you're here for the data. They're here for you. They're here for the speaker. You are the speaker. So, hi, I'm so glad to be here, right? This is a really great way to do an opening. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so excited to share this with you. And then if it's at all possible, this idea of working the room is from teaching, right? Like if you walk in between the desks and talk, people will see and feel that you are motivated and that you want to speak to everybody, if that's at all possible, right? You can and have some sort of movement. If not, I understand like room settings and those kinds of things, it can be super awkward. And then if you're possible, it's at all possible, it's a small setting. Depending on the type of presentations, you can even ask, tell me a little bit about what you wanted to learn today. And then that way you can tailor it to the audience. So that was it, the conclusions. I have 10 takeaways for when I send you the slide. But other than that, I wanted to thank you for coming on a Thursday and staying. I'm going to leave it open for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording again. All right. Do y'all have questions? Do you have talks coming up? Do you want some advice? Do you want to dig into anything else?
Thanks, T.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you. The exercises were surprisingly helpful.
I'm glad. Yeah.
Well, maybe not surprisingly, but they were definitely helpful.
Well, I think so. I think, a lot of times these webinars, they're not interactive. And so I aim to do that in mine. So, yeah. Well, thank you for participating in it and made it way more engaging that everyone shared in the chat and shared slides. So I thank you all for making this engaging as well. Judith, you
Yeah, it's more like, I don't know, it's a comment about insecurities more than a question, I think. But then I am a person who I actually like giving presentations and talks, and okay, it's fine. But then I'm always a little bit concerned or insecure about accent or mispronouncing things. So I guess that, this applies especially for people who English is not the first language, but I don't know. Like, I don't know whether there is a tip or suggestion. I don't know whether it's okay to apologize. I think it doesn't make sense at this point in my life anymore to apologize for accent or pronunciation. So yeah, I don't know. It's something that, yeah, it kind of still concerns me a bit sometimes.
thank you for bringing that up, and definitely don't apologize. I think there is research that shows that if the audience is motivated to listen to what the speaker's message is, they overcome any linguistic barriers. That's the language that they use, right? Whatever that linguistic barrier might be, including the way that you say things. And so what that means, I think, is that especially in an ever more increasingly international, like, scientific community, it's not uncommon to have all sorts of accents, right? Like, mine is a Texas accent. So it's, still, so yeah, anyway. And so the point is that with the increasing global community, if you focus your talk on, again, being tailored to keep the audience's attention, walk them through intentionally, that they overcome this idea, like, they won't know that you're speaking with an accent in a sense, because the message is what they're going to be paying attention to. So kind of focus it on that way. It's just like, I'm so excited to be here. I remember there was a student I was talking to at another university. He was in an astrophysics department. He is native, like, California boy. And he was giving a talk in Spanish. And he was talking about how his experience, because he'd lived in Spain for a few years and he wanted to reach out to the community that he was living in California. And so he kind of did it the other way around. And he was like, I was worried about how, like, good my Spanish was going to be, and, like, my English accent talking in Spanish. And in the end, it was like, well, what is it that you're trying to explain to them? Can you boil that down in a way that's simple? And it's the same takeaways from this. Do you know what your message is? Are you able to convey it? And keep them focused on the message, not the way that you're giving the message. So yeah,
Can I
enthusiasm.
just add something?
Yeah.
If you are speaking in the second language, it's one, you understand the audience who might be listening in a second language, and it makes it sometimes easier to give a talk because you're focusing on something that is a clear message that both is easier for you to present, but you as an audience member would understand. So a lot of people will tend to ramble and add in words and try and make themselves sound smarter by adding in unnecessary words. So just keeping things concise is both easier and I would say better than rambling and adding in unnecessary verbiage. So yes, as someone who is British and has a British accent, there's also people who say, "Oh, you have an accent." I'm like, "Yeah, surprise!" Like, people have accents, so yeah.
Yeah, to your point, I think this is it right here, right? This is how kind of I don't want to say overcome, because it's not a problem, right? It's just the way we talk. And so ways to focus on the presentation is exactly that: conciseness and authenticity. That's just who you are, and it's pretty great. And just being confident about the data and the message and the story that you're telling. So, the filler words is going to be really important too, regardless of whatever like you're presenting. I would say that same thing, like the vocal variety and the pacing. A lot of times people will tend to speak too quickly, and so slow down the rate at which you're speaking and try to take out filler words. in any, and you know, any accent, that's any way that you speak, that's going to be helpful to the audience, not having the filler words and just slowing down. And use those pauses to your advantage. So I don't know if y'all noticed, sometimes I was playing with it a lot. So you, the speaker.
Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thanks,
Thank
Edith.
you. Bye.